Okay, so we're back for part two, this time with biscuits. And we're going to pick up on some of the threads that we started on in part one and see where it goes. Okay, so if we can go to, you've talked about the psyche as an emergent level of reality that can't be reduced to any former levels. But you've also talked about what was helpful for me was to shift from seeing, let's say, the mind and the self and self-reflective thought and all of that, maybe just the psyche, from it being just your imagination. You know, the messages I absorbed all the time was you're just a fictional character, you're imagining yourself to be Jessica, to you've used this word imaginal. Mm-hmm. And for me, that shift is really important because it's saying that this dimension of reality is more so that its nature is partly made of images, but that's not, doesn't make them unreal. That they're, you know, that there's this whole logic that the non-dual paradigm starts with, which is if you do self-inquiry, for example, that, well, can you find your sense of self? Can you find your thoughts? Can you find your, you know, these concepts? And if you can't find them or touch them and they're intangible, then how can you believe that they're real? So maybe if you could say a little bit about that.
Okay. So I think there's kind of two things there which I'd quite like to comment on. One is the idea that, well, first of all, just the obviousness that however you come to understand it, this evolutionary process has led to this amazingly incredible biological level, and then what's emerged from that is a level that we experience as images. And by images, I don't necessarily mean just visual images, but I mean representations taken from our sensory experience, which then become free and we can move them about. And so if I remember the past, I get it as a image, or maybe a picture or a sound or a smell. And the same when I imagine the future. If I imagine a possibility, I imagine it with images. And one of the things which we have, which makes human beings so special, is we have this incredible language. So like I'm making these funny noises, they're reaching across the ear to you in your ears, and then your psyche is decoding the funny noises.
Doing my best.
As meaning, yeah. And hopefully, you know, if I make the funny noises in the right way, so we have meaning, and then so we can have images of words. So I'm speaking these out, you're hearing these, but I'm now going to say them to myself.
Okay.
Now, I just repeated words, but in my imagination, and that's thinking. And that enables me to reflect and imagine and do all the things we need to do in the psyche.
Yeah.
And that's real.
Yeah, so this kind of cuts through the whole, it's just your imagination.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it is
it's your imagination.
The imaginal.
And that is a very emergent level of reality.
Yeah.
It's not, it is incredible that we have got this world of imagination and what it's turned into. You know, people have been exploring, you know, going back to the shamanic traditions and all the way through. And that's what spirituality is concerned about, that level. The word imaginal I've taken from the Sufi tradition, where it's often called that, for instance. So this is part of the natural world. Mm-hmm. It's just that it's not in space anymore. You can't see it.
Yeah.
You know, it's not, when I hear it, it's not the vibration in the air. It's a different form of sensing. It's a different level of reality, and it's very significant. And then the other thing which you mentioned, which is different, I think, in a way, but it's fascinating, is that pointer, that thing which like, can you find your sense of self?
Yeah.
And what I get with that is, I no longer understand what it is that people are looking for. Mm-hmm. What is this self that you can't find? Because you can find your body. That's a level of yourself. You can find your persona, your personality, your past, the way that you imagine your psychic experience. So you put it like this: your system is having imaginal experience, let's call it, and sensory experience. Mm-hmm. Well, what else are you looking for? You're the system that's having that experience, and the idea that there's this little extra thing called a self, rather than, no, you're the whole thing. You're the whole evolving system, which reaches right back into nature, and which is emerging from it as Jessica or as Tim, experiencing these sensory levels and these imaginal levels.
Yeah.
And then it becomes incomprehensible to me what they expect to find. So that when you go, you can't find a self, it's like, well...
It's a bit of like this
What are you
sleight of
looking at?
hand thing, right?
I think it partly comes from history. Because, well, there's two components to it. One is a psychological component, which is I'm experiencing everything through categories, which are happening on the biological level as instincts, so I can process, I can not fall over when I walk. And then on top of that, there's all these things we call ideas, which are another level of category, which is evolved from the instincts, which enable me to go, oh, that's a biscuit, that's tea, that's you, that's a nail, that's a finger. It's like millions and millions of these categories, without which I wouldn't know what anything was. I can only say that's a biscuit and that's a table because I can differentiate them. Well, I can do that with my senses, but I have to make sense of that. I make sense of my senses with all of these categories. And I do that with myself as well. So I am also categorizing myself. So I have a story about who Tim is. And it could be right or it could be wrong. It could be, I could have a real down on Tim, which is undue, where you might go, well, that's true maybe, but there's other sides to Tim. Or I could have an inflated idea of Tim. Oh, he's just fantastic. And the rest I'm not going to look at. Or I remember some things from my past, but not others. And as I'm getting older, I'm re-looking at all of that. So my idea of who Tim... So that is not you. I get that. That's like your self-image is not you. That's not the self. That's how the self is thinking about itself.
Well, wouldn't you say it's a part of you?
Well,
it's an aspect.
It is. It is. The self, it's the way the self perceives the self. But the self is much more than the way it perceives itself, which is why you can discover new things about yourself. I'm not very conscious of how I process, and I've been trying for decades. And every time I become more conscious, it's a revelation. Oh, I've been processing it like that. Yeah. And then I have a choice. So I get that. But the idea that there's like a little person inside you who's the self, and it's a revelation that doesn't exist. It's like, well, of course that doesn't exist.
Well, it doesn't exist materially.
Well, it doesn't exist as a homunculus.
Right.
And that, I think, does come from the past. So part of the spiritual tradition that non-duality and Buddhism and the no-self traditions are arising from is in reaction to what came before. That's what always happens. And so what came before, which you see in a lot of places, India, Egypt, all sorts, is this idea that each one of us is like a spark of God. So that's yourself. You're like a little spark of divinity. So it is like a little self, and that spark is dropped into you, and that's what makes you conscious and makes you, and so the non-self traditions did arise by people reflecting and going, is that right? Is that right? And I agree with them. No, that's not right. You're not a little spark of anything. You're a whole. But then the non-self traditions aren't right either. They were a good evolutionary step on from we're all a little spark idea, and they moved it on. And now I think we need to move it on again and go, look, now we've got an evolutionary picture. We can go, you are an evolving, complex system that's individuated. You're the one individuated as you.
Yeah, and I like that shift to the self as the sort of like ecosystem. And to kind of tie it back to how this has helped me and so many other people to, like I said before, like to reaffirm the self or reconstruct the self from the ground up, is to be able to see the self as an integrated whole again, right? That's all these interconnected parts and pieces, but it all emerges into this one sort of, and that it's the self or the psychobiological system is the most healthy and best functioning when it experiences itself as an integrated whole. That's how I see it now.
Yes, and that itself is a challenge because on the level of the ideational level, the psyche level, we get fragmented. So that most of us experience one aspect of ourselves coming to the fore and then another aspect in different situations and so on.
Yeah.
And it is all one thing, but it can get fractured. And for most of us, there is a kind of fracturing that happens as we go through life and all the experiences, trauma. And so what someone like Carl Jung was suggesting with his idea of individuation was that part of the spiritual work is to find how to bring all of those parts of ourselves into a healthy whole.
Yeah.
So that we haven't got a shadow bit we don't look at, and we
Right.
bring it all, and that's a lot of work of
Sure is.
self-reflection to bring them in so that it becomes like a healthy whole. And then that health, the more we do that, it seems to me, the more we can wake up to these more emergent, deeper states. So that's where I think in a lot of traditions, most traditions actually, you get these two aspects. In the Zen tradition, for instance, you have the gradual path and the immediate path, and the same in the ancient Gnostic and pagan traditions, the path of
Advaita
the
also.
psyche, and then the immediate. And I think they're understood in different ways in different traditions, but from this perspective, they still make sense, but in a new way, because you just go, well, the gradual is the learning to integrate the self and be conscious. The self becomes conscious of itself, self-knowledge. You see how the bits of you bring them into harmony with each other, and you do that by coming into a more emergent state. I would say, I call it, coming up, so you can see yourself from this unividual perspective. You're at the next level of emergence. You can see yourself, you can bring yourself into a one, and then from there's something that just happens suddenly, and there's the oneness, or there you are in the big love, or you're able to touch those extra.
But I see
emergent
those
levels.
in a bit different way, because the gradual paths, they're still meant to, in these traditions, or in Advaita at least, the gradual path is the gradual path to the extinguishment of the self, the permanent extinguishment, and the direct one is the immediate, all at once, sledgehammer, boof, you're gone forever.
Exactly.
And that's
So-
not exactly
no,
what
no,
your
it's
point is.
no, it's the opposite. What I'm going is there's still the gradual path,
To something else.
and it's still really valuable, and there's still the sudden stepping into more emergent
I see what-
states,
okay,
but they're
I see what
actually
you're
not the
saying.
negation of the self.
Yeah.
This is about building a solid self, and then the next step is the self unividuates. So this is individuating, becoming a one, an individual,
Right.
and then this is unividuating, which is becoming an individual conscious of being
also one.
the one, also
Yeah.
one, that you're, and coming into the greater one because of that.
All right, we're in sync there.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe we should go into the whole ultimate truth thing and ideas. And I want to start it off by saying, because I don't think I maybe said enough before, because I'll often, talk to people and they'll get the sense that, oh, well, you're just putting forth another ultimate truth paradigm. And it's not what I'm doing. And I think it's important to say that in so much of what I try to encourage other people to do who feel sort of stuck in this sense of, let's say, non-existence of self, or you're just, awareness or whatever it is, as an ultimate unquestionable truth, is that you can actually, if you can at least entertain the possibility that it's not the ultimate truth, but it's one perspective, and there are other ones, that you then are able to, if you want to explore something else that may be more compelling. Compelling might mean that it feels more true, or like a more holistic rather than partial view of reality, or that it's something that serves you better, that serves your well-being better, and aligns maybe with your new values. But I think one of the things that you've helped me with a lot is to understand that in, for example, the self-negating non-dual pathways, there's really this idea that this is all beyond concepts. This is not about concepts. This is not about beliefs or ideas. I don't have any ideas anymore. But could you go in a little bit to, let's say, first of all, how these are, let's say, philosophies, first of all, that you get those ideas about what reality is, the theory of the self, then you're pointed to an experience that then is told to you that this is the unquestionable ultimate truth, that's self-evident, And this is what can be very harmful for people that can get stuck for years. And what's also just kind of dogma that you can get from Christianity also, where I can't question this, and if I do, I'm betraying reality, or I'm betraying the sacred, or I'm regressing, and then there's guilt, and there's shame, and there's doubt. So you've really helped, I think, me and a lot of people to just sort of unlock the doorway to having more freedom of perception and freedom to explore reality in another way beyond this kind of trap of, but it's the ultimate truth, I can't question it, and I've experienced it firsthand as self-evident.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot you've mentioned there, which
sorry.
is, oh, no, don't apologize. It's really important, and it does all fit together, which is why you've done it. So let's just talk about truth. I mean, I don't know what ultimate truth means anymore. I don't know what that would be. The word truth, its etymology comes from being trustworthy. And we still keep that sense when you talk about a true friend, is someone you can trust, or a false friend, someone you can't. And I think the essence of what truth is something you can trust. So, you know, if I say, we're in my hometown of Glastonbury right now, it's true, you can trust that. And when you go out the door, you'll find Glastonbury. And if you didn't, it would be false. Or, you know, any claim like that. This is going to drop, this biscuit. Well, it did, you know, and dropped everywhere, made a mess. Chocolate, don't want to waste it. So that's what I think we mean by true. So how would it be the ultimate truth? It's just something which you've got which is trustworthy. And there might be a deeper understanding where you could see more than that. So I could say, oh, we've been here for the whole of the morning. And you go, that's true, that's trustworthy. But you could also say, well, actually, the Earth's spinning at such a rate, we're miles, thousands of miles away from where we started. And that's also true. Or you could go, well, we're in the Milky Way, which is spinning at enormous speeds, and no one's been here exactly where we are now since the time of the dinosaurs. So what do you mean? We're still here, we've been here all morning. So, but they're all true, they're all trustworthy, but you understand how they fit together, or if they don't. Now, so my feeling myself, my advice would be forget this idea of absolute truth. That's a crazy idea. There's ways we've got evolving ways we can understand things, and what does that mean? It means we have ideas, which are essentially ways we categorize our experience and put them into narratives to make sense of things. That's what we're doing. We can tell this from that. That's essentially the very simplest form is this, not that, like an algorithm. And that's happening on every level. So the big mistake that I see people like me have made with spiritual experience is that somehow it doesn't involve that.
Right.
And it most certainly does. Because I would not be able to tell that I had an experience which was of oneness if I was not able to tell it as different to an experience which was of manyness. Or I could not experience something which I saw as God, unless I could compare it with something which I saw as mundane. I could not experience light if I couldn't compare it with not light, dark, or everything you experience, that you know, that you're able to experience it, means you must be able to categorize it as what it's not. So if you're no self, it's because it's not self. And so the big breakthrough with this really is just to go, look, because spirituality isn't supernatural, it's the most emergent nature of the natural, it continues all the natural processes, but on the next level. So the differentiation, which enables me on an instinctual level to tell where my weight is and what happens when I stand on a stone and I wobble and I bring it back, all those categories that will become categories that goes, oh look, there's a predator trying to kill me, you know, all of that, which will become on the higher level all sorts of other ideational things, can also become, I'm having this experience of whatever it is, which are spiritual. And all of that is happening because the system, can categorize and focus on what it's categorizing in such a way that it processes that in high definition and brings it to life. So the gnosis then...
Yeah, I want to get to gnosis.
Which is central to me, is an extension on a very emergent level of the same thing that's been happening the whole way through. And what happens in my experience, I mean, I've spent my life dedicated to these experiences and been very fortunate to do that and had so many I can't remember them all. And when you step into a very powerful experience of gnosis, of this knowing, you do know something. And there's an immense feeling of confidence and faith and hope and all sorts of things that can accompany that. But it's not because you've gone beyond ideas. It's just most of the things you experience, I'm looking at you, but I'm not going eyes, nose, lips. I'm not going Jessica. I'm not. All of that is me talking to myself. If I was doing that, I couldn't focus on you. But I'm still categorizing everything. It's just all happening unconsciously. I don't need to make it conscious. So when I stepped into the oneness for the very first time, or when I touched God for the first time, or all those things that have happened, I wasn't conscious that I was doing that. It just happened, but I was unconsciously doing that, which is why I could tell what it was. And in that way, then, there's a great old story which I came to understand in a completely different way, which was it's an old Hindu story about the emperor and the mango. Do you know that story?
I don't know that one.
Where the emperor has the holy man, the enlightened sage, comes to the court, and the emperor says, "What is enlightenment like?" And the sage says, "Have you ever had a mango?" And he said, "Yeah, it's brilliant. Yeah, beautiful." He said, how would you convey the taste of a mango to someone who'd never tasted sweet?"
Right.
And it looks like, it's a different thing, have to experience this. And that's right, you do have to experience it. But what the story really saying, I think, is that's just not true of these deep awake states. That's true of everything.
Love.
Everything you can imagine. We can only communicate because there's a commonality of experience.
Yeah.
So if I go, "Oh, this is really nice tea," and you know what tea tastes like, you've got an idea of what I mean. If I go, "This chocolate's very sweet," you know what sweet is, you know what I mean. If you don't know what sweet is, you have to actually eat it and go, "Oh, that's what sweet is," right? And then what's happening there is you're differentiating this with your sensory apparatus and going, "Oh, this is a different thing." And then from then on, you can have a name for it and we can talk about it. So none of this is beyond words, which is why people who've had these experiences can talk. I talk to people all the time. And my friends, because many of my friends have had lots of these experiences, so we can talk about them. And although our experience will never be quite the same, and I can never be sure that your experience of sweet is the same as mine, there's enough that we can communicate because it's not beyond words and it's not beyond categories. It's merely an extension of all of that onto the next level.
Well, it's also interesting now I think about how we say these experiences are ineffable and they're, you can't understand them with words or whatever. But then when I think about myself, I read books by Ramana Maharshi and Adyashanti and all these people, and they were describing what they're pointing to. And once I had it, I said, "Oh yeah, now I get it. I'm experiencing exactly what they described."
Yeah.
So clearly I was able to understand that the description matched what I had experienced.
Okay, so once you get that, look, in all experience, the system is somehow discriminating it from other experience. That's yellow, that's not yellow. That's God, that's not, all of that. Once you get that, then you see the sleight of hand that's happening in non-duality. And I say that as a confession.
Yes.
Because I have done this.
That's what I love about this.
I've done it with great good intention, but unconscious of what I was doing. And if I give you an example the way I would do it, these pointers, and the idea is you point to reality, and then it's self-evidently true.
Yes.
No ideas involved, you just know. And then once you've got that idea, you're stuck in it forever. because it's self-evident, right? So the classic one that I used, people like Rupert Spira use, lots of people use, is some version of, I'll do mine, his is very similar. Can you see right now that everything you're experiencing is a sensation or an imagination in consciousness? It's all in consciousness. This is yourself. You've made up the world. What you've really got is sensations and imaginations in consciousness. Now, if you step into that way of ideating, and that's what it is, a way of categorizing, I can do it now because I'm so familiar with it.
Sure.
I'm this big empty presence right now in which everything's arising as sensations and thoughts, and I'm this thing on the outside which is holding it.
Real experience.
Oh yes, a very real experience and an interesting experience actually. But is it true? Well, let's start with, is it self-evident? True means, is it trustworthy? So is that right? Is that a good way of ideating what this is? You can certainly do it. Let's just look at whether it's self-evident. Because the revelation for me, and it's amazing how difficult people find it to see this, but once you see it, it's really obvious. What I'd been doing in that pointing to others and myself was I'd been telling them the answer in the question.
Right.
So it wasn't self-evident at all. I'd created the self-evident experience. So I had said, can you see that everything is a sensation in consciousness? Is it? Maybe. But I'd already cast this and gone, no, this isn't the table. This isn't Tim. This isn't the tea. These are all just sensations in a thing called consciousness. Is there a thing called consciousness or a presence called consciousness? Maybe, but I've actually made you think in that way. So what you think is self-evident is actually a direct result of the ideas that I have put into you or I've put into myself. So what you're getting is a way of ideating this. It's not self-evident at all. Then you can go, okay, that's one way of ideating it. What are the other ways? And then you can compare them. So if I do the other way, do you want to interject there, or do you want me to do the other way?
Well, I just wanted to say, if you could just add in, there's the other part of the pointer, which is, and you've talked to Rupert Spira about this, the tautology part, where you say, is there anything that you've experienced outside of your experience, or anything you've experienced outside of consciousness?
That's what he does, and it's goes, look, have you ever had an experience that wasn't in consciousness?
I go,
no, you haven't.
Of course not.
So it's all in consciousness. Again, what he's done there is he's gone, there's a presence called consciousness,
which I never would have thought of in that way. Or
I have never ever heard a little child come up and go, oh, have you noticed it all in consciousness? They don't do that. You have to learn it. You have to learn this way of thinking about it. It's foreign. You hear it, you go, oh, and then you learn it, and then you experience it.
Usually from spiritual books.
Nearly always. That's the way I did it. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible to get it spontaneously, and if there's somebody who thinks they have, maybe you have. Although I think if you really trace your history, you might find you picked it up from somewhere. The key point is that right? Because you've had that lady, because one way of reading what's being said, it's if you've never experienced anything in consciousness, that's presuming an ontology that there's a thing. So if you reduce it to what you're actually saying there, it's, have you ever experienced anything you haven't experienced, or have you ever been conscious of something you weren't conscious of?
Right.
And of course the answer to that is no. I've never been conscious of something I've not been conscious of. But it's a tautology. Yeah. Nothing's been said at all. So either it's an ontology, in which case you've been led to a way of ideating, or it's simply a tautology.
Yeah, and it's an extremely powerful and convincing shift where you go, oh my God, so there's nothing outside of my senses, or there's nothing outside of my consciousness, or it's all a projection of my consciousness that can radically change your life because it's an experience.
And it's interesting. It's an interesting experience.
And it can also be solipsistic and extremely...
Because if you introduce it to somebody, and if you go, look, the way you ideate will shift your experience. We're going to look at just two ways, but there's multiple ways. That's interesting. Shows you the power of ideation. So you go, look, if you experience it, that you're this presence, and you're not a person anymore, you're a presence within which there's a person, like in a dream. You know,
can do that.
It's like, oh, you can do that, and it's exciting because you've never done it before. It's like, whoa, that's a whole different way of perceiving reality.
Yeah.
But then come back to the way that most people perceive reality, which is, oh no, this is not a sensation. This is a table, and I am conscious of the table. And there's no thing called consciousness. It's that I am conscious of things. And even myself, I am conscious of my own thinking.
It's a process rather than a thing.
It's
or
an activity. You're conscious of things. It's an activity. It's a verb. It's not. There's no thing called consciousness as something which is just this presence. Why would you think that? You can think it. So if people are listening to this, like try it out. Go from there's this big space and you're the space, and everything's arising within it, and then flip it and go, or you're a psychobiological system in the universe, and you're conscious of the universe, and you're processing it, and you're processing yourself, and you're conscious of yourself. If you can see that you can move between those two, and they're neither are self-evident, they're two different ways of seeing it, then you can go, oh, which of those is better?
Right.
And the problems that you just raised, I think, means this one is better.
Right.
Because you get, if everything is just in consciousness, then all
in my
yeah, then it's solipsism. This is what all that exists is what I'm conscious of. It's not taking into account all the information I'm taking in unconsciously, and it's not taking into account you.
Right, and leads often to derealization, which not everybody will have that experience and find that harrowing or negative, but a whole lot of people do, especially from that specific pointer.
Say more what you mean by derealization.
Well, if you're saying that everything is, often what comes with it is it's just a projection of your consciousness, and you can't confirm that anything is outside of that. So therefore, there's this sense of it being almost like, that it's just sort of like a movie projection or something like this, and leads to a sense that reality is not real outside of you, hence derealization. And that can become something very harrowing, something very delusional, and something that can lead to dysfunction as well.
Yeah, because it's not trustworthy. It's not true.
Well, it feels like it is when you have that experience.
Which is why
when it's set up in that way.
That's why it can be delusional. But what I think you discover if you keep going with that is that it's not trustworthy. That there is a more trustworthy way of looking at things, which is you're an individual system arising from the oneness of everything, and that you're in relationship and you're conscious and you're taking in information, and that's what being conscious is. And you take it in with your senses and you're processing it with the imaginal, and you're taking in a whole load you can tell unconsciously. Yeah. And the fact is, that when I came in here from our house earlier, I can't be conscious of the house now as a sensation, but I'm pretty confident it's still there.
Sure.
And when I go back out into the garden, there will be the house.
Yeah, yeah. And see, what this does, and what I really want to make a point of, is that while I find this to be much more compelling, I would not go around saying, but this is the absolute ultimate truth. But what I think more than what I would want people to step away from when I explore your ideas or I share them with people is not so much that they have to say, okay, now that's the ultimate truth, but that they are able to have the freedom to be able to explore these different perspectives and choose what feels most compelling, because you're not trapped in the sense that I experienced that, therefore it's the ultimate truth. And that's very tricky to undo that whole loop of being told the ultimate truth and that it's going to be your salvation and you're awakened when you get it.
It's the truth of any fundamentalism. So firstly, hallelujah that you're saying that, because look, this understanding that I've arrived at is what I've arrived at. I'm a guy who's been here for 65 years. I've done my best, and this is what I found. anything of value will last for a bit and then it will be improved upon. And we're constantly improving our understanding. And it's trying to correct from past things which feel like that wasn't a good understanding that I've believed, which other people believe, and move it on.
Yeah.
And it's what I'm suggesting is it's comprehensive, but it's vague because I'm not a biologist. I don't know how that works. I'm not a physicist. I've got ideas about it.
Yeah.
It's no, so of course it's not the absolute truth. It's like we sometimes imagine truth like a map, and you've got the perfect map, but the perfect map of reality would be reality. Because any map is a simplification of reality. So the whole idea is crazy. So get rid of that. And then the idea that you're pointing out, which is so sad, is when you go, well, I've experienced this, it must be real. Maybe for people who are in that with non-duality, take a look at other people who are experiencing it with other types of fundamentalism. Right. So take a Christian fundamentalist or an Islamic fundamentalist or anything, because they've got the same problem.
Yeah.
So if you go to a Christian fundamentalist, they go, well, I know this is true because I experienced Jesus in my life. Right. And I know that I've sinned and I'm being judged because I experience it. Right. It's like, okay, as long as you ideate it in that way, you will experience it like that.
Right.
But if you can see that that's what you're doing, you can see you could ideate it differently.
Exactly.
Once you know that, and this is what I think you said so clearly, just said it, I'm just repeating you really, is like once you see that, you can now choose which one you want, because one isn't given, one's not self-evident, one's not a revelation of truth.
One's not unquestionable.
Yes. Yeah. They're both different ways of ideating this incredibly complex, strange, beautiful business of being alive.
Yeah. And in my encouragement would be also when you are then evaluating them, do you want to be following a teacher or a community or a pathway that is authoritarian and fundamentalist and belittles or refuses questioning or challenging?
Well, to me, it's like if there's an ultimate truth you think, which is your opinion, and you're leading people to it, then the best thing you can do is shut everyone up and get them to agree with you. If you think that you're in this dynamic evolutionary process in which the evolution of each individual is what it is about, you want to do the opposite. You want to encourage each person to reflect for themselves, to find what works for them, and that they will develop. Each person has their own understanding. We have places of meeting, but it's you'll never have the same as me, and your experience will be different, and that's what's so precious. But there's enough that we can go, yeah, I get that, but in a different way, and that's what we're all doing this, and then we touch each other and share what we've got.
Yeah, and just imagine if, this would be my ideal vision, would be imagine if folks like Rupert Spira or anybody who's, putting forth something that's the unquestionable ultimate truth, if instead they were saying, here's a perspective that I can point you to, how to experience it, and it can benefit you in this, and that way, try it out, see if it supports you. But if you don't, then fine. Not having an investment in whether or not you agree that it's the ultimate truth, that would also leave people much more free to say, okay, I'll try this way of perceiving reality, but you're left open to continue exploring other things without feeling guilty or made to feel like you're wrong and that sort of thing. That would be a great transition, but I understand that that's a tall order.
Well, I think that's where we're going.
I hope so.
I think that the post-scientific spirituality, the unividual spirituality, I don't mean necessarily using that name, the next step for us in humanity will be that. I think it has to be. And the reason at the moment that, look, if you have been ideating reality according to how you, according to all the ideas that you took into you through your upbringing, through your culture, through your education, and you have a whole set of ideas, and you don't even know you've got them really. They're just there. They're just unconsciously the way you process reality is this. And every, if you look at history, every culture has that, and they're different. We experience it, lots of us, through a scientific worldview. Sometimes a negative scientific worldview. It's like, oh well, everything's really just physics and all of that stuff. There's lots of ways. you go back and compare a culture that thinks the earth is the center of the universe and there's fairies everywhere that run the plants, and the thunder is a big man in the sky with a big sledgehammer, and those are your ideas. Well, it's a very different reality that you're experiencing as the way it is than us now going, no, that's electromagnetism and the universe is billions and billions of galaxies, and it's different. But you've got yours that you've fallen into through your upbringing in that particular culture at that moment in history, and then someone comes along and goes, here's another way of seeing it, and you find that you can go, whoa, there's another way of seeing it. That's a huge shift. So it's no surprise that people get very impressed by that.
Yeah.
Because you've moved from an unconscious way of perceiving to a conscious way of perceiving in a totally different way. The unfortunate thing that happens, you now get stuck in that.
Right. Yeah. And it prevents you from evolving. And
yeah, and especially if you're told this is not to do with ideas, this is something either supernatural or beyond question.
You can't use your thoughts are taken off the table.
And your thoughts
to
are a bad
think
thing
about it.
Because
then
they're
really
just part of the problem. You're just in a bubble. And the same thing will happen in a very different context with a Christian fundamentalist who also, those thoughts are the bad thing, the doubt and devil, and it's the same process.
Yeah. Maybe we can end on this note that one of the best parts about this that I found for myself and for other people who feel like, again, if they start to doubt the ultimate truth of, that there's no self or everything is just a projection of their consciousness or what have you, that they are regressing. They're going back to sleep. They're going back into delusion. So there's that sense of shame and fear and guilt and, almost of like damnation. I'm going to go back to endless suffering if I don't see reality this way anymore. That it changes the narrative from that you're regressing back to delusion to, in some way, you're kind of moving forward. I mean, you're evolving out of these outdated models of authoritarianism, and that you're actually expanding in some way. We talked about this in a video, I think, where you were saying, kind of like, well, how cool that you were able to experience this different way of perceiving things, but now you're moving it on to something else, almost going forward to something different or something else.
I love that. I think that's right, because that's what I was trying to say with, if you've got your unconscious conditioning, which is not a bad thing, by the way. You need that. You cannot function without all of that. We educate people so they've got that. But often it's only semi-conscious. You then shift it by being consciously introduced to a new way of seeing things. Fantastic. Isn't that interesting? And you experience it. Well, maybe you come into an experience of oneness for the first time. And that's immense, because it is one, I think, or you touch God, or whatever the thing, depending on the tradition. You touch something more, you see it in that way. Keep going. The trap is you've arrived. No, you haven't arrived. That is something you've seen. But if you keep going, there are other ways. You see, you don't have to go back to being unconsciously stuck in where in what you grew up in. You can actually keep evolving and then choose, because you have conscious choice. That bit's good. You take the ideas. There's a whole cluster of ideas in non-duality, say, and they come together, and just pull them apart and go, yeah, it's all one. Yeah, I think that's a good idea personally. This is the ultimate truth. That's a nonsense idea. Lose that one. It's self-evident. No, that's not true either. But there is a oneness I can experience, and when I do, it's it's really significant. Yeah, keep that.
Right.
That's good.
Yeah.
And then what I'm trying to offer is like, well, I've been doing this all my life. See if this is any use to you. This is very inclusive, hopeful view which incorporates the key ideas in spirituality of awakening, of there being a higher presence, of the survival of death, of there being meaning, but also links it to biology and physics and right the way back to mathematics in one process. So it's one. What do you think? And this is key, and I know you know this, it's not just a theoretical framework, because if you step into it, you now experience reality through these ideas. And what's happened for me is, these are so far by far the best ideas I've found to experience it. And you open and you find yourself really honouring each individual person, and yet meeting in this enormous love and this benevolence that arises from the experience of oneness.
Right.
This communion. And so that's why I invest so much of my life energy into going, how can I say this well enough
Yeah.
that people might get a glimpse of the thing I'm exploring, and they might go, oh yeah, I'll play with that.
Right.
And then they play with it and pass it on, it'll evolve.
Exactly. And yes, and then for me also, this is, a lot of these elements have become my preferred way of experiencing reality. And so I'm very inspired to share it with other people. And yeah, I mean, I think that we've really covered a lot of the things that we wanted to cover.
Yeah, and I just wanted to go back to where we started in the first video, which is to go, this has been an enormous amount of time for me, and the support I've had from people like you who've helped me refine the ideas and try and work out how to best express them. But that I am going to start releasing, hopefully this year, a systematic exposition in what I'm calling a pod book.
Yes.
So the freshness of a podcast with the organization of a book, so that if people are interested in, because these are unfamiliar, and so therefore piecing it together and how does it fit with that, it's difficult, it takes a bit of time. But if I can do it in that way, I'm hoping that more and more people will go, oh, that's of interest, I'll try out that. And then, like you've been suggesting, maybe we can get together people who've been hurt by non-duality and are looking for an alternative, which feels like they're moving forward and not going back to something. That they actually take their spiritual journey to another level.
Yeah.
Then we can get together and spend some time together to really not only get the ideas but get the experience.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
comes. And it's a beautiful experience. I mean, it really is, isn't it? It's lovely, beautiful.
And we'll just kind of come back around to that experience of being able to experience unity, if that's something that speaks to you, while also celebrating and savoring and affirming not just the reality of the personal and the individual, but the preciousness of it and the significance of it.
Yeah. Well, maybe a place I would like to end is to talk about an experience which my wife Deborah had at the retreat that we led together, that you were at over the last weekend, which is when we get together, we had this big experience of coming up, as I call it now, coming into the individual perspective. But in old traditional language, you could say you commune with God. This is a very different idea of God.
Or that you're going down to the depths.
Yeah, you could say that, but that you're coming into something greater than you, and it's just the enormous amount of love and beauty. And after we were sharing in that circle, if you remember, you were there, and we were talking about all the different things that people had felt, and it really struck me what Deborah said, which was that she just fell in love with all of the particulars.
Yeah.
It was the particulars, and it made me really smile, because there's a particular song that she's been saying, oh, I really love that song recently. And the song's called I'd Like to See Like the Sun Sees, which is a lovely poetic idea. I want to see like the sun sees. And what struck me immediately she said that was, well, the sun doesn't see the sun. The sun sees all the particulars that it illuminates. That's what the sun sees. And that's what I think happens with this new approach to awakening, is you come into the awakening and it's like seeing the sun, and it's the light. And then as you commune with it, from that perspective, you look at all of the individuality and you see like the sun sees. And instead of it being, everything's from an individual, it's like, oh my God, it's all so beautiful, and it's so exquisite, and even the most terrible things are like amazing. And there's an enormous appreciation, because you've come up into this more emergent place for the everyday.
You see it in a new light.
For all, you see it exactly, isn't that right? That's right, you see it in a new light. There's this huge appreciation of the life you're already living.
Yep.
And your small little life, which we all have, is absolutely full of significance.
Yes, that's exactly exactly. You can expand the perception, but keep yourself within it and shift your relationship to the particulars. Yeah. You did good.
Thank you.